Welcome back to the channel. Today we have an absolute masterclass in family drama, and the ultimate success is the best revenge story. When parents play favorites to this extreme, you just know it's going to backfire spectacularly. Let's dive right into this insane Reddit saga. Can you even imagine being told by your own parents, straight to your face, that you're a failure? That you are fundamentally broken, not worth investing a single dime in, while they happily hand your younger brother a cool $135,000 for a luxury home? That's my story. And let me tell you, that cutting remark, that ultimate betrayal of my own flesh and blood, ignited a fire in my gut that changed absolutely everything. My name is Marcus. I'm 36 years old now, and I am a master builder, specializing in custom timber architecture and high-end metal restoration. When you look at my hands today, you see a map of scars, calluses, and ingrained grease that no amount of pumice stone will ever wash away. I wear those calluses like badges of honor, but to my parents, they were the mark of a peasant. Growing up in a fiercely affluent high-society suburb of Chicago, appearances weren't just everything. They were the only thing. Our house was a sprawling colonial estate, and my parents, Arthur and Beatrice, made sure it was a monument to their own supposed greatness. My father was a senior executive at an investment bank, a man who believed the world revolved around stock portfolios and credit scores. My mother was an elite art broker, spending her days curating galleries and judging everyone who didn't know the difference between Monet and Manet. They were the absolute picture of proper, wealthy suburban professionals, and they expected nothing less than perfection from their two sons. From my earliest memories, the dynamic in our household was painfully, suffocatingly clear. My younger brother, Julian, born 3 years after me, was the undisputed golden child. He was destined for greatness from the moment he could speak. Julian was a natural academic prodigy, the kind of kid who could ace an advanced calculus exam without even opening a textbook. Me? I was the black sheep, the problem child. Not because I was out getting arrested or causing trouble, but because my brain didn't operate on their rigid corporate wavelength. I couldn't care less about macroeconomics or debate club. I would study until my eyes bled just to pull off a C+ in history, while Julian effortlessly brought home perfect report cards. "Why can't you apply yourself like your brother?" became the miserable, repetitive soundtrack of my youth. Every parent-teacher conference ended exactly the same way. My father's jaw clenching in tight-lipped disappointment, and my mother offering a strained, forced smile to the teachers, assuring them they would deal with my lack of ambition at home. But what my parents completely failed to see, or perhaps actively chose to ignore, was that I had my own kind of genius. While Julian buried his nose in textbooks, I had an almost supernatural, intuitive understanding of how the physical world fit together. By the time I was 10, I could dismantle a lawnmower engine, clean the carburetor, and reassemble it blindfolded. I could look at a broken mechanism and just feel how the gears were supposed to mesh. My hands seemed to understand the physics of wood and metal long before my brain could even find the words to explain it. When I was 15, I found an abandoned, rusted-out 1950s John Deere tractor sitting in a neighbor's overgrown backfield. It was garbage, destined for the scrapyard. I spent an entire brutal, sweltering Illinois summer hauling parts, grinding rust, welding cracked iron, and rebuilding the engine block from the ground up. I spent every penny of my lawn mowing money on spare parts. It wasn't just a hobby. It was an obsession. I poured my soul into that machine. Neighbors would stop by, leaning over the fence, absolutely marveling at what the quiet teenager was resurrecting in the dirt. The day I finally got it running, the roar of that revived diesel engine was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I was covered in oil, sweating through my shirt, but I felt like a king. I genuinely, foolishly thought that, for once, my father might actually be proud of me. I ran into the house and eagerly dragged him out to the driveway to see my masterpiece. My father stepped out onto the pristine concrete in his $1,000 suit. He didn't smile. He didn't walk around the machine. He simply stared at it, then looked down at my blackened, grease-stained hands. He checked his Rolex. "Well," he sighed, his voice dripping with absolute disdain, "I hope you're done playing with this filthy junk now." Your hands look like a dock worker's. Summer is almost over, Marcus, and you need to stop this blue-collar fantasy and focus on getting your abysmal grades up. Julian is already doing Ivy League prep, you know. He turned and walked back inside without another word. It felt like a physical knife twisting in my ribs. That was the moment I realized that in their house, creating something real with your own two hands was a sin. Ouch. That is absolutely brutal. The kid literally rebuilds a tractor engine from scratch, showcasing real engineering genius, and his dad just complains about his hands. You can easily see how this toxic dynamic is setting up a massive power shift later on. High school was a relentless continuation of this waking nightmare. Julian joined the debate team, the chess club, and became captain of the tennis team, all perfectly curated, Ivy League-approved activities. My parents converted our entire finished basement into his private study, a shrine to his academic conquests, overflowing with trophies and certificates. When I quietly asked if I could clear out a small, damp corner of the garage to set up a workbench and a lathe, I was immediately denied. The noise will distract Julian from his studies, my mother declared. By my senior year, our paths had completely, violently diverged. When Julian was accepted into Yale University, my parents threw a massive, catered gala at our home. There were ice sculptures, champagne towers, and 50 of their closest, wealthiest friends. To our son, the Yale man, my father bellowed, raising a crystal flute, his chest puffed out with blinding pride. I stood in the corner near the kitchen doors, practically invisible in my own home. Nobody asked what my plans were. Nobody cared. When I graduated a few years prior, my celebration had been a quiet, tense Tuesday night dinner at a local steakhouse. My graduation gift was a firm handshake and a cheap briefcase I would never use. Why? Because I wasn't going to a prestigious 4-year university. I had been accepted into a highly specialized, elite trade academy for advanced timber framing and metal fabrication. When I had announced my decision, you would have thought I told them I was joining a street gang. Trade school? My mother gasped, physically recoiling as if I had spat on her. But what about the state university? They accepted you. My father slammed his fist on the table. That is not a real degree, Marcus. You are deliberately lowering the standing of this family. You are settling for a life of mediocrity and sweat when you should be aiming higher. We did not raise our son to be a laborer. I tried to explain the massive demand for custom builders, the 6-figure earning potential, the satisfaction of the craft. None of it penetrated their armor of snobbery. To them, without a prestigious university name slapped on my chest, I was dead weight. So, I started trade school with absolutely zero financial support. While Julian had his Yale tuition, luxury dorm, meal plans, and a brand new BMW fully paid for by my parents, I was working brutal night shifts at a lumber yard just to afford my tools and tuition. I didn't mind the hard work. In fact, I thrived. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by mentors who looked at my hands and saw talent, not dirt. But the true, unforgivable betrayal, the knife in the back that severed my soul from my family, came when I was 23 years old. I had graduated at the top of my class and had been working as a journeyman. I was ready to take the leap and start my own business. Marcus Custom Timber and Iron. I had the skills, I had a small list of eager clients, but I needed heavy machinery, a commercial planer, a heavy-duty welder, and a reliable work truck. I had saved relentlessly, but I was exactly $15,000 short. I swallowed my immense pride and went to my father. I didn't ask for a handout. I brought him a meticulously drafted 40-page business plan, showing my projected margins, my client commitments, and my repayment schedule. I just needed him to co-sign a small commercial loan at his bank because my credit history was too short. To my absolute shock, he smiled. He looked over the paperwork, patted my shoulder, and said, "All right, Marcus. It's a risk, but I will co-sign. Go down to the branch tomorrow and see Mr. Henderson. Tell him I sent you." I left his study feeling like I could fly. For the first time, my father believed in me. I spent that entire night awake, sketching out my workshop layout, dreaming of the future. The next morning, I walked into the grand lobby of my father's bank, wearing my best suit, holding my business plan. I sat down in Mr. Henderson's plush office. The loan officer, an old golfing buddy of my dad's, looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and extreme discomfort. He kept shuffling my paperwork, refusing to meet my eyes. "Marcus," Mr. Henderson finally sighed, taking off his glasses. "I'm sorry, son, but I have to deny this application." My heart stopped. "What? Why?" "The numbers are solid. My father is co-signing. He told me he approved it." Mr. Henderson looked at the closed door of his office, then leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Marcus, Arthur called me last night, from his private line." He paused, looking genuinely sick to his stomach. "He explicitly instructed me to deny your loan." The room started spinning. What? Why would he do that?" "Your father told me that you are—" Henderson swallowed hard, reading from a notepad. "Unreliable, prone to childish fantasies, and a guaranteed default risk. He said co-signing for your little carpentry hobby would put a fraction of a % of risk on his perfect credit score. And—" Henderson hesitated, looking at me with deep sorrow. "He said he needs his credit absolutely pristine right now. He's preparing to act as the primary guarantor for a luxury penthouse lease in Manhattan. For Julian." I sat there, frozen. The air was sucked out of my lungs. My father hadn't just refused to help me. He had looked me in the eye, smiled, promised his support, and then picked up the phone to actively sabotage my business, permanently assassinating my character to his colleagues, all to ensure he could buy another luxury playground for his golden child. He wanted me to fail. He needed me to fail so his narrative of the successful son and the failure son would remain perfectly intact. Hold up, actively sabotaging your own son's business loan? That is textbook villain behavior right there. OP's father is using his financial influence as a quiet weapon just to protect his own fragile ego and control the family narrative. That's not just bad parenting. That's pure evil. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood up, took my business plan from Henderson's desk, and walked out of that bank a completely different man. The son who wanted his father's love died on the marble floor of that lobby. The betrayal was a poison in my veins, but instead of letting it kill me, I used it as fuel. I didn't speak a word to my father about what I knew. I just stopped calling. I stopped visiting. I went ghost. I took on a second job, then a third. I worked days on a framing crew, evenings doing commercial maintenance, and weekends doing odd handyman jobs. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. I lived on cheap black coffee, peanut butter sandwiches, and an absolute burning rage. Within 14 months, I didn't need my father's signature. I had saved the $15,000 in raw, bloody cash. I rented a freezing, drafty, uninsulated warehouse on the bad side of town and officially launched Marcus Custom Timber and Iron. It was during those grueling, dark early days that my life was saved by an angel. Her name was Sarah. I met her in the emergency room at 2 a.m. I had been working late, exhausted, and a heavy steel beam slipped, slicing my forearm open. I was sitting in the harsh fluorescent light, covered in sawdust, sweat, and blood, feeling the crushing weight of my solitary struggle. Sarah was the triage nurse. She was doing a double shift, fighting her own war to pay off massive nursing school loans. She didn't look at me with disgust like my mother would have. She looked at me with deep, piercing empathy. As she stitched my arm, she noticed the deep calluses, the permanent grit under my nails. "You work hard," she said quietly, tying off a suture. "Trying to build a business," I grunted, wincing. "Doesn't leave much time for a social life or keeping my hands pretty." Sarah paused, looking right into my eyes. "The hands that create real value in this world are the most beautiful hands there are. Don't ever apologize for them." I fell in love with her in that exact second. Sarah and I were cut from the exact same cloth. We understood the grind. We understood that nothing is handed to you. When we started dating, we didn't go to fancy restaurants. Our dates consisted of her bringing takeout to my freezing warehouse, sitting on overturned buckets while she studied medical textbooks and I welded steel brackets. She never once questioned my ambition. She never once made me feel small. We got married 2 years later in a tiny courthouse ceremony. My parents didn't attend. They claimed my mother had a gala planning committee that couldn't be rescheduled. Julian sent a text message. We lived in a cramped, incredibly dingy one-bedroom apartment above a noisy laundromat. It was all we could afford, as every spare dollar went into buying better equipment for my shop and paying down her student loans. We were broke, but we were an unbreakable team. I invited my parents over once, shortly after we were married, hoping maybe, just maybe, seeing me as a married man running a legitimate business might soften them. My mother drove up in her Mercedes, parked on the street, locked her doors, and refused to get out of the car. "This neighborhood is far too dangerous, Marcus," she said through a cracked window when I walked out to greet her. "I'm not risking my safety. It's frankly embarrassing that you force your wife to live in this squalor." And she drove away. Meanwhile, Julian had graduated Yale and was instantly handed a high-level associate position at a predatory investment firm on Wall Street, a job secured entirely through my father's golf course networking. Julian's starting salary was astronomical. His life was a blur of bespoke suits, Michelin star dinners, and exclusive clubs. My parents talked about him like he was the second coming of Christ. Every phone call I endured with my mother was a relentless broadcast of Julian's greatness. While they celebrated his bonuses, I was fighting tooth and nail for every single contract. The early years of the business were a meat grinder. The stress of meeting payroll, finding clients, and handling the brutal physical labor took a massive toll. There were nights I lay awake on our lumpy mattress, my muscles screaming in agony, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my father had been right, wondering if I was destined to be a peasant grinding my bones to dust for pennies. But Sarah would roll over, wrap her arm around my chest, and whisper, "You are building an empire, Marcus. Block out the noise. Keep hammering." So I did. I started taking on wildly complex custom jobs that other contractors were too scared or unskilled to touch. Giant, sweeping curved staircases made of reclaimed barn wood. Intricate, hand-forged iron gates for wealthy estates. Slowly, agonizingly, my reputation began to spread. The wealthy clients of Chicago started whispering about a craftsman who didn't just build things, but created functional art. We were just starting to see a glimmer of real financial stability when the final, fatal blow from my family was struck. It was the week of Julian's 27th birthday, and he had just been promoted to a vice president position at his firm. My parents insisted on hosting a massive celebratory dinner at a ridiculously pretentious, ultra-exclusive country club in the city. Sarah didn't want to go. She despised the way they treated me, but I convinced her. I had just secured the opportunity to bid on a massive commercial restoration project in the city. If I won it, it would put my company on the map permanently. But to handle the upfront material costs, I needed a short-term cash injection of about $20,000. I had convinced myself, in a moment of utter foolishness, that maybe seeing Julian's massive success would put my father in a generous mood to finally, fairly, support his eldest son. We arrived at the country club in my beat-up Ford work truck, handing the keys to a valet who looked at it like it was a rolling garbage can. Inside, my parents had reserved a private dining room overlooking the golf course. Julian sat at the head of the table, looking pale and exhausted, but wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. For 2 excruciating hours, Sarah and I sat in total silence as my parents practically worshipped Julian. They discussed his portfolio, his stock options, his elite social circle. Not once did they ask how Sarah's nursing career was going. Not once did they ask if my business had survived the winter. Then, as the dessert plates were cleared, my father stood up, tapping his crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. He puffed his chest out, a grand smile plastered on his face. "Beatrice and I have an incredibly exciting announcement," Arthur beamed, placing a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder. "Julian, you have made us prouder than words can express. You have conquered Yale, and now you are conquering Wall Street. But a man of your immense stature needs a home base that reflects his power." My father reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out an envelope. "The real estate market in Manhattan is fierce, But your mother and I have liquidated some assets to ensure our golden boy gets what he deserves. Julian, we are transferring $135,000 into your account tomorrow. It is the down payment for that penthouse overlooking Central Park you've been eyeing. To your continued, undeniable success. The room erupted in applause from the few extended family members present. Julian looked at the envelope, smiled weakly, and muttered a thanks. I felt the blood drain from my face. $135,000. Handed over just like that. Free and clear. A gift to a man who was already making hundreds of thousands a year. I looked at Sarah. Her jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth would shatter. She knew about my upcoming bid. She knew we were currently eating ramen noodles 3 nights a week to save capital. Before I could stop her, Sarah spoke up, her voice slicing through the celebratory chatter like a scalpel. That is incredibly generous, Arthur, Sarah said, her tone dangerously calm. Marcus's business is actually at a massive turning point right now. He's bidding on a historic city contract. A fraction of that amount, even a $20,000 short-term loan, fully repaid with interest, would allow him to secure the materials and double his company's revenue this year. Since you're investing in your son's futures tonight, are you planning to support Marcus's expansion? The entire table went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. My mother let out a sharp, theatrical gasp. Sarah, how incredibly crass of you to bring up money at Julian's celebration. My father slowly lowered his wine glass. The jovial, proud mask vanished, replaced by a look of utter, glacial contempt. He stared at me, completely ignoring Sarah. Support his expansion? Arthur sneered, the words rolling off his tongue like poison. Marcus is running a glorified carpentry shop. He works in the dirt. Julian is moving millions of dollars through the global economy. Marcus is building a legacy with his bare hands. Sarah shot back, her voice rising. He works 18-hour days. He is a master of his craft. He is a laborer, Arthur shouted, slamming his fist on the table. The silverware jumped. He chose an alternative, lower-class path. Why on earth would I take money from my legacy to fund a sinking ship? Why would we ever reward failure? Failure. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. After the years of breaking my back, after overcoming his secret sabotage at the bank, after building a life out of nothing but grit, I was still and would forever be a failure in his eyes. Julian made something of himself. My father continued relentlessly, pointing a manicured finger at me. He listened to our guidance. You rejected everything we stand for to play with wood and metal. You made your incredibly poor bed, Marcus. Now lie in it. Don't come begging to me to fix the consequences of your lack of intellect. I am seething right now, handing the golden child $135,000 while mocking OP's grit in front of the whole family? Sarah is an absolute queen for speaking up, but this right here is the exact moment Marcus's inner fire goes supernova. Let's see what he does with that rage. I felt a strange, terrifying calm wash over me. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was absolute zero. The desperate, wounded little boy inside me who just wanted his dad to be proud finally, completely died. I stood up slowly. I didn't shout. I didn't flip the table. I just looked at the man who sired me, realizing he was nothing but an empty suit filled with arrogance. I have never begged you for a damn thing, old man, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. And I never will. You think money and addresses are what make a man. You're going to find out how wrong you are. I looked at my mother, who was clutching her pearls, and then at Julian, who wouldn't even meet my eyes, staring intensely at his dessert plate. Keep your money, I said. Keep your fake prestige. But know this, I am done. Do not call me. Do not look for me. You have one son now. And I promise you, you will never, ever get the privilege of seeing what I am about to build. I grabbed Sarah's hand. We walked out of that private room, out of the country club, and out of their lives forever. Part 5. The Oath in the Night and Buying the Dead Land. Expected word count. 800 words. The drive back to our tiny, cramped apartment was swallowed in a profound, heavy silence. The streetlights flashed across the cab of my battered Ford truck, illuminating the tears streaming silently down Sarah's face. She wasn't crying out of sadness. She was crying out of sheer, unadulterated rage on my behalf. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "They are toxic. They are cruel, soulless people." I reached over, taking her soft hand in my calloused one, squeezing it tight. "Don't apologize. You defended me. You did what they never could. But Sarah, I'm done being the victim of their narrative. I'm done proving them wrong in my head. I'm going to prove it to the world. I am going to build an empire so massive, so undeniable, that it will cast a shadow over their entire pathetic existence." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at our rickety kitchen table under a flickering fluorescent bulb, surrounded by architectural drafting paper. I wasn't just sketching a business plan anymore. I was sketching a manifesto. The next morning, I took the ultimate gamble. I went to a local credit union, far away from my father's banking empire. I leveraged every single asset we owned. I put up my truck, my machinery, and Sarah co-signed with her nursing salary. We didn't take the money to buy a flashy house or a nice car. I bought a piece of land everyone else said was cursed. It was a 7-acre parcel of rugged, elevated terrain just outside the city limits. It was heavily forested, aggressively steep, and sat on a massive shelf of solid limestone bedrock. Every developer in the county had passed on it. They called it the dead land. It was considered entirely unbuildable because blasting the rock to pour standard foundations would cost a fortune, and the access roads were treacherous. Because of its worthless status, I bought the entire 7 acres for pennies on the dollar. When we drove up the rutted dirt path to stand on the peak of that rocky hill, the wind howling through the ancient oak trees, Sarah looked at me with a mix of terror and absolute trust. "What are we going to do with a mountain of solid rock, Marcus?" she asked, pulling her coat tight against the chill. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away from the hard, unforgiving gray stone beneath our feet. "Everyone looks at this and sees an obstacle," I said, looking out over the sprawling valley below. "I see the ultimate foundation. You can't build a legacy on soft dirt, Sarah. You build it on rock. We aren't going to blast it. We are going to anchor directly into it. We are going to integrate the stone into the architecture." I unrolled a massive sheet of drafting paper on the hood of my truck. Over the past week, fueled by the venom of my father's words, I had designed a masterpiece. It was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar vision. A primary estate home framed entirely with massive, hand-hewn Douglas fir timbers, accented with custom-forged black iron, bolted directly into the living bedrock of the hill. Massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that would catch the sunrise. And below it, terraced into the hillside, a state-of-the-art, 10,000-square-foot commercial fabrication workshop. "This is going to be Marcus Estate and Custom Works," I told her, my voice echoing in the empty woods. "It will be our home, our headquarters, and my masterpiece. I am going to build every square inch of it with my own 2 hands and my own crew. It might take years. It might break my back. But when it is done, it will stand for a century." Sarah looked at the drawing, then looked at the fierce, unyielding fire in my eyes. She didn't blink. She just smiled. "Then let's get to work." The bridge was burned. My family was dead to me. There was no safety net, no rich father to bail me out, no $135,000 trust fund waiting in the wings. There was only the rock, the steel, the wood, and my 2 hands. My father had called me a laborer. He was about to find out what a laborer can do when he decides to build a kingdom. Goosebumps, guys. Literal goosebumps. Buying the dead land and anchoring a foundation straight into the bedrock is such an epic metaphor. OP's taking all their negativity and turning it into an unbreakable foundation. This is the ultimate quiet revenge. I absolutely love this. What do you think about it? The next 3 years were a blur of sawdust, sparks, and unrelenting, bone-crushing labor. When you cut ties with the only family you've ever known, you are left with a massive, gaping void in your chest. Some people fill that void with alcohol. Some fill it with therapy. I filled it with concrete, steel, and timber. I worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week. The seventh day, Sunday, was supposedly my day of rest, but I usually spent it doing payroll, drafting new architectural blueprints, or performing maintenance on my heavy machinery. Sarah was my anchor through all of it. She took extra shifts at the hospital, her feet aching just as much as my hands, ensuring that our personal bills were paid so every single cent my company earned could be violently shoved back into the development of the dead land. Building on that massive shelf of limestone bedrock was exactly the nightmare the other developers had predicted, but it was a beautiful nightmare. We couldn't dig trenches for the foundation. Instead, I rented a massive diamond-tipped core drill. I spent an entire brutal Chicago winter up on that freezing, wind-whipped hill, drilling deep, perfect cylinders directly into the Earth's crust. We drove massive steel rebar pilings deep into the bedrock and poured high-strength epoxy resin down the shafts. The foundation of my home and my workshop wasn't just sitting on the Earth. It was literally stitched into the geology of the planet. No storm, no earthquake, and certainly no bitter words from an arrogant father could ever move it. As the steel skeleton of the commercial fabrication workshop began to rise against the skyline, something incredible happened. The older, grizzled veterans of the Chicago construction scene, men who had been swinging hammers since before I was born, started to take notice. They saw a young guy taking on an impossible piece of land with nothing but sheer will. One Saturday morning, a 60-year-old master welder named Hank, a guy who usually charged $100 an hour, pulled his truck up my muddy driveway. He stepped out, looked at the massive steel trusses I was trying to rig single-handedly, and shook his head. "You're gonna kill yourself doing that alone, kid," he grunted, pulling his welding helmet out of the cab. He didn't ask for a dime. He just started working. The next weekend, 2 retired master carpenters showed up, then an electrician. They worked for beer, barbecue, and the pure, unadulterated joy of being part of a project that was built on craftsmanship rather than cheap corporate shortcuts. They became the fathers I never had. With their help, the business exploded. We finally finished the 10,000-square-foot commercial fabrication shop at the bottom of the hill. It was a cathedral of industry, equipped with overhead cranes, CNC plasma cutters, and massive timber milling bays. Because I now had the facility to handle monolithic, complex builds entirely in-house, Marcus Custom Timber and Iron began winning contracts that previously only went to massive corporate firms. We were building custom luxury ski lodges in Aspen, hand-forged gates for tech billionaires, and restoring historic cathedrals downtown. The money started flowing in. Not just survival money, but real, staggering wealth. And at the very top of the limestone hill rising above the trees was our home, the estate. It was a 6,000-square-foot architectural masterpiece. I hand-selected every single massive Douglas fir timber that made up the exposed frame. I forged the iron railings on the sweeping staircase myself, hammering the glowing steel late into the night. The floors were reclaimed wide-plank walnut, and the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the valley that was absolutely breathtaking. It was a multi-million-dollar property, fully owned, built on blood and defiance, and my parents had absolutely no idea it even existed. To them, I was still the failure starving in a dirty warehouse. The silence from my past was finally broken on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early October. I was in the main shop, reviewing the quarterly financials, when my cell phone buzzed. It was an unknown New York number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello, Marcus? Is that you?" The voice was shaky, hollow, and thick with exhaustion. Took me a full 3 seconds to recognize it. It was Julian. We hadn't spoken a single word since that catastrophic dinner 3 years ago. "Julian," I said, my voice completely neutral, leaning back in my leather office chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Marcus, I'm in Chicago. I had a meeting with a client out in the suburbs, and I got totally turned around on the back roads because of a detour. I'm sitting in my rental car on the side of Route 119. I'm looking at a pair of massive custom iron gates. The stone pillar has a bronze plaque that says, Marcus Estate and Custom Works. His voice trembled, escalating into a high-pitched panic. Marcus, please tell me this is a coincidence. Please tell me you didn't build this. I stood up, walking over to the massive window of my office that overlooked the winding driveway. Far down at the bottom of the hill, parked just outside my front gates, I could see a black luxury sedan sitting in the rain. Press the intercom button on the keypad, Julian, I said calmly. I'll buzz you in. Drive up the hill. 5 minutes later, Julian's car pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of the main house. I walked out onto the covered timber porch to meet him. When he stepped out of the car, I was genuinely shocked. This wasn't the arrogant, glowing golden child from the country club. Julian looked like a ghost. He was 29 years old, but he looked 40. His hair was thinning, his skin was a sickly, pale gray, and his eyes were completely bloodshot with deep, bruised bags hanging underneath them. His $1,000 designer suit hung loosely on his frame, as if he had lost 20 pounds. He didn't say a word. He just stood in the rain, staring up at the massive timber-framed mansion, his jaw literally hanging open. He looked at the perfectly manicured grounds, the towering stone chimneys, and then down at the sprawling, state-of-the-art industrial facility buzzing with activity below. You! Julian stammered, stepping up onto the porch, looking around like a man waking up on an alien planet. You built this. All of this. Me and my crew, I said, crossing my arms. Come inside. You look like you're about to pass out. I led him into the great room. The massive stone fireplace was crackling. Sarah was sitting on the leather sofa, holding our newborn son, Leo. When Julian saw her, and the beautiful, peaceful life we had created, his knees physically gave out. He collapsed into one of the armchair recliners and buried his face in his trembling hands. I don't understand, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Mom and Dad. They told everyone you went bankrupt. They told the whole extended family that you were living in a trailer park, doing cash-in-hand handyman jobs just to feed your wife. They used you as a cautionary tale at every single family holiday. Of course they did, I replied, a cold, humorless smile touching my lips. It fits the narrative. If I'm a success, they're wrong. And Arthur and Beatrice can never be wrong. Julian looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, completely shattering the stoic, Wall Street facade he had worn his entire life. They ruined me, Marcus, he sobbed, the dam finally breaking. That $135,000? It was a trap. That penthouse costs me $14,000 a month in maintenance, taxes, and mortgage. I'm making a fortune on paper, but I am drowning in debt trying to maintain the lifestyle they demand. I work 90 hours a week. I'm on 3 different anti-anxiety medications just to get out of bed. I don't sleep. I don't eat. My fiancée left me 6 months ago because she said I was a hollow shell of a human being. He looked around the room, gesturing wildly at the solid oak beams and the roaring fire. I have spent my entire life shuffling imaginary numbers on a glowing screen to make terrible, rich people even richer. I have never built a single thing. At the end of the day, I have nothing to show for my life except a panic disorder and a high credit limit. I'm a soulless money machine, Marcus. You're actually living. You won. Wow. This is the twist we've been waiting for. The golden child isn't a villain. He's a victim of the exact same toxic system. Julian's absolute breakdown here is heartbreaking, but it proves that their parents' definition of success was a complete illusion all along. Looking at my brother broken, weeping in my living room, I had a choice. For 3 years, I had held onto the fantasy of rubbing my success in his face. I had imagined the moment I would look down on him and laugh. But staring at the reality of Julian, a profoundly sick, manipulated, and deeply unhappy young man, the anger just evaporated. I realized he was just as much a victim of our parents' toxic narcissism as I was. They had just used different weapons to destroy him. They starved me of affection, but they had fed him poison disguised as love. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of the dinner at the country club. I walked over, sat on the coffee table in front of him, and put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Take a breath, Julian," I said firmly, the voice of an older brother taking charge. "It's over." "What's over?" he asked, looking up with red, tear-streaked eyes. "The charade, the debt, the suffocating weight of their expectations." I looked back at Sarah, who gave me a gentle, affirming nod. She knew exactly what I was about to do. "You're good with numbers, right? Not the fake Wall Street derivatives, but real, hard numbers." Julian sniffled, wiping his face. "I was a top-tier financial analyst. I can read a balance sheet in my sleep." "Why?" "Because Marcus Custom Timber and Iron just secured 3 commercial contracts worth a combined total of $8 million, I told him. "My business is growing faster than I can physically manage. I have the best craftsmen in the state, but my back office is a disaster. I need a chief financial officer, someone who can manage multimillion-dollar cash flows, optimize our supply chain purchasing, and handle the corporate taxes." Julian stared at me, completely dumbfounded. You want to hire me? After everything? "I don't hold you responsible for the sins of our father, Julian," I said honestly. "But there are conditions. You have to quit your firm tomorrow. You put that Manhattan penthouse on the market immediately. You sell the BMW, and you come out here. There's a fully furnished guest cabin behind the main shop. You can live there rent-free while you pay off your debts. I can't pay you what Wall Street pays, but you'll sleep 8 hours a night, and you'll be part of building something real." Julian didn't even hesitate. He stood up, grabbed me by the shoulders, and hugged me tighter than he ever had in our entire lives. He wept into my shoulder, thanking me over and over again like a man who had just been pulled from a sinking ship. The transition over the next 6 months was nothing short of miraculous. Julian moved out of New York in a matter of weeks. The penthouse sold quickly, allowing him to clear his massive, hidden consumer debts. He showed up to my property on a Monday morning driving a sensible used Subaru, wearing a pair of Carhartt pants and a flannel shirt. The designer suits were gone. He moved into the guest cabin and immediately went to work. And he was brilliant. The kid really was a genius, but now his intellect was focused on something tangible. Within 3 months, Julian had completely restructured my company's financial model, saving us hundreds of thousands of dollars in material waste and tax inefficiencies. He negotiated incredible bulk rates with our steel and timber suppliers. More importantly, the haunted, sickly look completely vanished from his face. He started eating Sarah's home-cooked meals. He started working out in the mornings. Sometimes, after he finished his spreadsheets for the day, he would come down to the shop floor. I handed him a hammer, showed him how to use a belt sander, and taught him how to finish wood. The first time he built a simple oak coffee table with his own hands, he looked at it for an hour, his eyes glowing with genuine, quiet pride. We weren't just brothers anymore. We were a formidable team, the outcast and the fallen golden child, united, building an unstoppable empire. But, inevitably, the ghosts of our past came looking for us. I did not see that coming, and I absolutely love it. Giving Julian a job and a genuine purpose instead of rubbing the success in his face? That is the mark of a true man. Marcus completely broke the generational curse right there. I believe love has a magical power. It can heal and mend relationships within a family. My parents, Arthur and Beatrice, had been frantically trying to contact Julian for months. When he abruptly quit his prestigious Wall Street job and vanished from his penthouse, they went into a complete tailspin. They couldn't brag about him at the country club anymore. To them, Julian was having a temporary mental breakdown. He ignored their calls, blocked their numbers, and explicitly told extended family members not to reveal his location. But secrets in wealthy families never stay buried forever. An aunt had run into Julian at a hardware store in Chicago, put 2 and 2 together, and eagerly reported back to headquarters. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon in late spring. Julian and I were standing in the main driveway of the estate, going over a set of blueprints on the hood of my truck. Sarah was sitting on the porch swing, rocking baby Leo. The heavy iron gates at the bottom of the hill had been left open for a delivery truck. Suddenly, a pristine, silver Mercedes S-Class came roaring up the steep limestone driveway. I recognized the license plate instantly. My blood went completely cold. But I didn't panic. I just rolled up the blueprints, set them down, and waited. Julian stood next to me, his posture stiffening, but he didn't run. The Mercedes slammed into park. The doors flew open. Arthur and Beatrice stepped out onto the crushed gravel. They were dressed in their typical weekend country club attire, cashmere sweaters draped over their shoulders, looking like they had just stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. They marched toward us, fury radiating from their pores. "Julian!" my mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the timber walls. "What on earth is wrong with you? We have been terrified. You abandon your career, you sell your home, and we find out you are hiding out here with... Her voice trailed off. For the first time, Beatrice actually looked up. She looked past Julian and saw me. Then her eyes drifted upward. She took in the massive, soaring, timber-framed mansion. She saw the pristine landscaping, the expensive vehicles parked near the multi-million-dollar fabrication facility below. She saw the sheer, undeniable magnitude of wealth and success that surrounded her. My father stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. The aggressive, domineering patriarch was suddenly completely paralyzed by cognitive dissonance. The brain inside his head simply could not process that the laborer son he had actively sabotaged had built a kingdom that dwarfed his own net worth. "Marcus!" Arthur finally choked out, his eyes darting frantically around the property. Whose property is this? Are you the caretaker here?" "I own the mountain, Arthur," I said, my voice eerily calm, resonating with the absolute authority of a man standing on his own land. "Every rock, every piece of steel, every board of wood. It's mine." "That's impossible," Beatrice whispered, touching her pearls. You were bankrupt." "No, Mother." Julian stepped forward, his voice completely steady. He didn't sound like a terrified child anymore. He sounded like a man. "You wished he was bankrupt. You lied to the family because you couldn't stand the thought that your blueprint was wrong. Marcus is the CEO of the most sought-after custom architecture firm in the Midwest, and I am his chief financial officer." My father's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. His ego, fragile and massive, went into absolute defense mode. He tried to force a sickening, fake smile, attempting to pivot and claim this victory as his own. "Well," Arthur stammered, smoothing his jacket. "Well, I always knew you boys would figure it out. This is quite an operation, Marcus. It's rough, a bit blue-collar, but impressive. Now, Julian, enough of this rebellion. It's time to come home. Mr. Henderson at the bank said he can get you a senior advisory role if you apologize for your erratic behavior." "I am home, Dad," Julian said, staring Arthur dead in the eyes. "You and Mom almost killed me. You gave me an expensive cage and told me it was the world. I was drowning in debt and popping pills just to survive the life you forced on me. The brother you called a failure, the son you actively tried to destroy, is the one who saved my life. How dare you speak to us like that?" Beatrice shrieked, tears of anger springing to her eyes. "We gave you everything. We gave you $135,000. You bought a prop for your country club stories." Julian yelled back, his voice echoing like a gunshot. "You didn't want a son. You wanted a trophy. Well, I'm done playing the game. I am a builder now. Get off our property." Arthur turned to me, his eyes pleading, desperate for the old dynamic where I craved his approval. "Marcus, be reasonable. Tell your brother he's making a mistake. You've done well here, son. I admit it. We can merge our networks. I can introduce you to my golfing buddies. We can be a family again." I looked at the man who had called my banker to ruin me. I felt no anger. I felt absolutely nothing. Just pity for a small, pathetic man. "I don't need your network, Arthur. My clients own the golf courses you play on," I said softly, delivering the final, crushing blow. You made your choice at that dinner 3 years ago. You chose your legacy. I chose mine. Do not ever drive up this hill again. So cool. My clients own the golf courses you're playing on. It felt like a bucket of cold water thrown straight in Opie's father's face. All that fake authority of his was completely stripped away, left bare. Truly satisfying. Comment 1 if you agree with me on this. They stood there for a long, humiliating minute, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I just stared right through them. Finally, defeated, utterly stripped of their power and their delusions, they got back into their silver Mercedes and drove slowly down the mountain, disappearing from our lives. The final nail in the coffin of their egos came 6 months later. Architectural Digest, the absolute pinnacle of high society design publications, the exact magazine my mother left fanned out on her coffee tables to impress her wealthy friends, ran a massive 12-page cover feature on Marcus Estate and Custom Works. The cover photo was a stunning drone shot of our timber mansion glowing warmly in the twilight, anchored into the limestone cliff. The article detailed my journey, explicitly praising my uncompromising, blue-collar grit, and my refusal to conform to traditional corporate pathways. It highlighted Julian's brilliant financial maneuvering that allowed the company to scale. It was a national triumph. The day the magazine hit the newsstands, I knew exactly what was happening in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. I knew the phones in my parents' social circle were ringing off the hook. I knew that every single person my parents had lied to about my failure was suddenly seeing my face and my massive estate on the cover of the most prestigious magazine in the country. The humiliation for Arthur and Beatrice must have been absolute, all-consuming, and entirely inescapable. 2 days later, my inbox pinged. An email arrived from my father's personal address. I opened it while sitting in my office, sipping coffee. Sarah came up behind me, resting her chin on my shoulder, looking at the screen. The email was long, desperate, and pathetic. It was filled with words like misunderstanding, regret, and family bonds. They begged for a chance to reconcile. They pleaded to be allowed to come visit, citing that it was cruel to deny grandparents the right to meet their beautiful grandson, Leo. They promised they had changed. They wanted to be part of the glow, part of the success, part of the legacy they had tried so hard to abort. "What are you going to say?" Sarah asked softly, kissing my cheek. "Are you going to curse them out?" "No," I smiled, a deep, resonant peace settling over my soul. Anger means they still have power over me. Silence and finality is the only language narcissists truly understand. I hit reply and typed a short, meticulously polite, but utterly devastating response. "Arthur and Beatrice, thank you for your email and your congratulations on the magazine feature. However, a reconciliation is not possible. The value of a man is not determined by the size of his bank account or the address of his property, but by the strength of his character when things are hard. The doors of this estate are always open for the people who stood in the freezing rain and swung hammers with me in the darkest hours of the storm. They are permanently closed to those who only wish to arrive when the mansion is fully built and the sun is shining. Julian is thriving, healthy, and happy. Leo is surrounded by love. We have built our own family here, based on respect, not conditions. Please do not contact us again. We wish you peace. Marcus." I hit send, and I permanently blocked their email addresses. I blocked their phone numbers. I completely erased their access to our reality. I closed my laptop and walked out of my office, stepping onto the massive timber balcony that overlooked the valley. The morning sun was burning off the mist. Below, in the fabrication yard, I could hear the roar of a diesel engine and the sharp, rhythmic crack of a hammer. I looked down and saw Julian, wearing a hard hat, laughing hysterically with old Hank the welder as they rigged a massive steel I-beam. Julian looked up, saw me on the balcony, and offered a sharp, respectful salute before getting back to work. I walked back inside, where Sarah was laying out toys on the thick living room rug for our son. I sat down next to them, taking Leo's tiny, soft hands in my large, scarred, permanently calloused ones. I promised him, silently, that he would never have to earn my love. He would never have to fit into a mold. He would be free to build his own life, whatever that looked like. My parents handed my brother $135,000 and told me I was a failure. In return, I built an empire that completely eclipsed their entire existence. But the true revenge wasn't the money, the estate, or the magazine cover. The ultimate revenge was that I was genuinely, profoundly happy, and I didn't need them to be. I had taken the stones they threw at me, and I used them to build a fortress of peace. And that is a legacy no amount of money can ever buy. What an incredible journey. He didn't just get revenge, he got peace, and he saved his brother in the process. The best way to destroy toxic people is to simply build a beautiful life they have zero access to. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next one.